A real estate billionaire wed a homeless artist to stop a family scandal, unaware she was the one who'd teach him what love means. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The rain came down hard over Manhattan that night, drumming against the glass walls of the Phale Corporation Tower. Inside the top floor office, Ethan Phale stood alone. His reflection stared back at him from the window. 33 years old, tailored suit, flawless posture, and eyes that had forgotten how to rest. In front of him, a tabloid headline screamed across the screen. Phale family scandal erupts, illegitimate heir rumor rocks the empire. He closed his laptop with a sharp click. His PR team had tried everything, but the story would not die. Unless he did something drastic, something that would restore the family name before the board meeting in 72 hours. That was when the idea hit him, a marriage clean and immediate. No love, no romance, only convenience. Across town, in a dim alley behind a shuttered cafe, a young woman was sketching under a leaking awning. Her name was Mira Collins. Her fingers were stained with paint and cold rainwater, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. She had been homeless for 6 months ever since the community art center lost its funding. But even with an empty stomach she drew. It was the only thing that made her feel alive. The following morning, Ethan's black Mercedes stopped at the corner of 5th and Mercer. His assistant had traced a story about a homeless artist whose portrait of a child in a red coat had gone viral online. That woman, he decided, would be perfect, real, unconnected, and disposable to the press. When he stepped out of the car, Mira looked up, startled. He was the kind of man who did not belong on this street. Impeccable suit, silver watch, the calm of someone who never had to hurry. "Are you Mira Collins?" he asked, his voice even almost too quiet against the hum of traffic. She hesitated, clutching her sketchbook. "Who's asking? My name is Ethan Phale. I have a proposal that could change your life." She laughed a tired, weary sound. "You people always say that before you take something away." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I am offering you a contract. 30 days. You become my wife legally. In return, I will pay your debts, fund your art, and ensure you have a home." Her eyes widened. "Marry you? For what public charity?" "For peace," he said, simply. "And for silence. There is a family scandal that needs to disappear." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain dripping from the edge of the awning. Mira studied his face, the clean lines, the rehearsed calm, and then looked down at her trembling hands. "And when 30 days are over, you will walk away free," he said. "With everything you need." She exhaled, the words tasting like surrender. "Fine. But if this is some twisted test, I want it in writing." That night in his penthouse filled with glass and silence, Ethan laid a contract on the table. 4 rules. No affection, no interference, no lies, and no promises. After 30 days, Mira signed with a smudge of ink. He slipped a platinum ring onto her finger, mechanical and cold. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Phale." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Do not call it new, just different." Outside, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement like broken stars, 2 strangers bound by paper, about to learn that no contract can control the human heart. The morning after the contract was signed, the world felt different for both of them. For Mira, sunlight filtered through glass, taller than any building she had ever lived in. The penthouse stretched endlessly, all marble and silence. A city skyline glittered below like a world that was never meant for her. Her reflection in the mirror wore a silk robe that was not hers, a ring that still felt heavy on her hand, and eyes that did not quite believe what had happened. Ethan's voice came from behind her, low and distant. "Breakfast is served at 8. Claire, my assistant, will take you to the tailor after." She turned. He was already dressed for the day, navy suit, cufflinks, precise face unreadable. "So this is what marriage looks like," she said quietly. "This is what an agreement looks like," he corrected. "Do not confuse the two." Later in the vast dining room, she sat at one end of a long glass table while Ethan reviewed documents at the other. 2 silver domes covered her plate. When she lifted one, the scent of warm croissants and coffee filled the air. She had not smelled real butter in months. He spoke without looking up. "The press will expect us at the charity gala tonight. Dress appropriately. Claire will brief you on everything you need to say." Mira placed her fork down. "And what do you need me to say, Ethan?" "Only what sounds real," he said, his tone clipped. "Even if it is not." The rest of the day moved like rehearsal. The tailor pinned gowns while stylists circled her, speaking in quick, polished tones. They changed her hair, her posture, even her voice. When they finished, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The homeless artist from the alley had vanished, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged beside Ethan Vale. That evening, the gala unfolded under crystal chandeliers and camera flashes. Ethan held her hand just tight enough for the photographers. Every smile he gave looked perfect, but his eyes never softened. She had been told to stand still to nod when spoken to be the quiet grace beside him. But when a reporter suddenly asked Mrs. Vale, how did you and your husband meet, Mira's pulse quickened. Ethan started to step forward, ready to intervene. Instead, she smiled. At an art show, she said calmly, he bought the only painting no one else wanted. The crowd laughed. Flashbulbs popped. For the first time, Ethan looked at her, truly looked. When they returned home, the night was thick with city rain again. Mira kicked off her heels and leaned against the doorway, half laughing, half trembling. You look terrified, she teased. You went off script, he said, but there was a hint of admiration beneath the reprimand. Maybe, she replied, but at least it sounded human. He did not respond. Instead, he walked toward the window, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. Do not mistake this for something it is not, he said softly. We are solving a problem, not living a dream. Mira folded her arms. You say that like you have never had one. He turned, and for a second his composure cracked. Dreams are for people who have time to lose. Days turned into a routine neither of them admitted to enjoying. Breakfast in silence, scheduled public appearances, her laughter filling the spaces he had kept empty for years. One evening she found him in his study surrounded by architectural sketches. These buildings, she said, touching the edges of the blueprints, they all looked the same. Straight lines, perfect symmetry. No soul. He looked up slightly amused. You think you can do better? I think people do not live in perfect lines, she replied. They live in the cracks. Something shifted that night. He began to linger when she painted on the terrace. Sometimes he asked questions, other times he simply watched as if her presence filled the silence he had long accepted as permanent. But peace never lasted long in Ethan's world. A week later, the tabloids struck again. Photos of Mira entering the penthouse before their wedding headlines, calling her a charity bride. He slammed the newspaper onto the counter. Did you speak to anyone? Her voice steadied. No. But it looks like you do not need enemies when you have family. His jaw tightened, suspicion and guilt colliding in his eyes. That night, she painted alone until dawn, a storm raging outside and another one growing between them. On the canvas, she drew two figures standing apart under the same rain, connected only by a single line of red paint that refused to fade. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew something had changed. The contract had begun to crumble, not from deceit, but from feeling. The scandal spread faster than Ethan could contain it. Within 48 hours, every business network was flashing headlines. Vale heirs marriage a publicity stunt. Stock prices trembled, partners demanded statements, and investors whispered about replacing him as CEO. Inside the penthouse, silence had a sound like tension pressed into glass. Mira sat on the sofa, her hands folded tightly around a mug of untouched tea. The television played muted coverage of their faces, captured in flashes and captions that made her look like a con artist. Ethan paced near the window, his phone lighting up every few seconds. I can fix this, he said. Finally, his tone clipped the same voice he used in boardrooms. By doing what she asked quietly, by pretending harder, he stopped jaw set. You think this is a game? No, she replied. I think it is your life, and I am just a pain stroke in it. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them felt wider than the skyline outside. Ethan exhaled, rubbed his temples and said, the board meeting is tomorrow. They want proof that this marriage is real. We have to show up together. Mira looked up. And if I say no, then everything collapses, he said simply. The company, my name. She nodded slowly. Then we will go. But after that, I am done pretending. The next day, the conference room of Vale Corporation glowed under the harsh light of cameras and investors. Rows of suited men and women waited as Ethan entered with Mira on his arm. She wore a simple white dress, no jewelry, no makeup, heavy enough to hide her exhaustion. When the chairman asked for a statement, Ethan began his speech numbers projections control. But halfway through, Mira's voice broke the rhythm. You all want proof of love, she said, steady and clear. Here it is. Love is not always polished. It is messy. It is the reason a man who lives in glass learns to open his window. The room froze. Ethan turned to her, shock flickering into something softer. The cameras clicked again, this time not out of scandal but fascination. That evening, as the elevator doors closed behind them, neither spoke. When they reached the penthouse, Mira walked straight to the terrace. Rain had started again, soft and relentless. She stood under it, her hair clinging to her face, breathing hard. Ethan followed silent. "You told me not to confuse a contract with marriage," she said. "But today, for the first time, I saw the difference." He stepped closer. "What difference? You kept saying this was about reputation, but somewhere between your perfect speeches and my broken sketches, we became real." He looked at her, then truly looked the way he had at the gala, but this time without the armor. "Mira," he said, his voice quieter than the rain, "I do not know how to do real." "Then learn," she whispered. "Start with honesty." He hesitated, the words caught between pride and surrender. "The article that started it all," he said slowly. "It came from my uncle. He wanted me out. He planted every rumor. And I believe he will stop once I marry you." Mira blinked, stunned. "So you use me as your shield." His silence was answer enough. She turned away, her voice breaking. "You could have told me the truth. You said no lies." "I thought I was protecting you," he said, stepping forward. "No," she replied, backing away. "You were protecting yourself." The storm outside grew louder. Lightning flashed against the glass, throwing their shadows onto the wall, two outlines facing each other, divided by pride and pain. Finally, Mira set down her wedding ring on the table. It made a small, clean sound against the marble. 30 days, she said softly. "That was the deal. And it ends tonight." She walked out, the elevator doors closing behind her with a quiet chime. Ethan stood motionless, staring at the ring glinting under the chandelier. For the first time in years, the penthouse felt exactly like what it was, an empty fortress built to keep everyone out. He picked up the ring, closing his hand around it, and whispered to the silence, "Maybe this is what losing everything feels like." The next morning, sunlight crept through the tall windows of the penthouse, touching the empty space where Mira had stood the night before. Ethan sat in the same place, still wearing yesterday's suit. The ring she had left behind glimmered on the marble table. For the first time, it felt heavier than any of his real estate empires. His assistant Claire arrived quietly. She stopped when she saw him, eyes flicking to the untouched coffee. "Sir, the press is demanding a statement about your wife leaving." Ethan's voice was low and hoarse. "Tell them nothing. There is no statement." "Ethan," she said carefully, "if you say nothing, the board will assume the rumors are true." He looked up at her, his eyes dull. "Maybe they are." Hours passed, reporters filled the street below. Investors called threatening resignations. But Ethan could hear only one sound, the echo of Mira's words. "Then learn, start with honesty." By late afternoon, he left the building alone. No bodyguards, no car, just a man in a suit walking through the same rain-washed alleys where he had first found her. The city noise softened into a kind of silence. At the corner of Fifth and Mercer, he saw the old awning again, the one she had used as shelter. Her sketches were gone, washed away, but the outline of color still stained the brick wall like a memory that refused to fade. Across the street, a small community art center had reopened under a new banner, Home Studio Collective. Through the window, Ethan saw her hair tied back, paint smudged on her cheek, helping a group of young artists hang canvases. She laughed at something. One of them said, light and unguarded, the way she never had in his house of glass. He stepped inside quietly. The scent of paint thinner and coffee hit him first. When she turned and saw him, her smile faded, but her eyes stayed calm. "What are you doing here, Ethan? I needed to see what you built," he said softly. "It suits you." She crossed her arms, paintbrush still in hand. "You did not come for art. Say what you need to say." He hesitated, his voice almost breaking. "You were right. I used you. I thought I could buy peace the way I buy buildings. But peace does not come with contracts." Mira studied him, unsure whether to be angry or sad. "You build towers that touch the sky, Ethan, but you never build a home." He looked around the room at the cracked walls and the bright canvases and said quietly, "Maybe I never knew what one looked like until now." A silence stretched between them, filled with things neither could say. Then a small girl approached, holding a dripping paintbrush. "Miss Mira, can you help too?" she asked innocently. Mira blinked, then smiled faintly. "Sure. Hand him that roller." The girl placed it in Ethan's hand, and for a moment his polished world collided with her paint and silk boardroom and studio. He dipped the roller into the bucket and began to paint beside them. The children laughed at his clumsy strokes. Mira said nothing, but the corners of her mouth softened. By evening, the walls gleamed with color. As the students left, Ethan wiped paint from his hands and turned to her. "Let me fix what I broke," he said. "Not with words, with actions." How, she asked quietly. He took a deep breath. "Tomorrow there is a press conference. I will tell them the truth. All of it. And I will name you as the rightful founder of this place. It will be yours completely." She frowned. "And what about you? I will step down from Phale Corporation. It is time I learned to build something different." Mira stared at him, searching for the lie that was not there this time. Finally, she said, "If you do this, you cannot take it back." He nodded. "Good. Some things should not be reversible." The next day, cameras flashed across the conference hall. Ethan stood before them, the ring still in his pocket. His voice was steady. "The woman you called a fraud is the only honest part of my life. She taught me that a home is not made of walls, but of people brave enough to care. I am resigning as CEO, effective immediately. And I dedicate the new Phale Art Foundation to Mira Collins, the woman who reminded me what love means." Across town in her small studio, Mira watched the broadcast on old television. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were bright. The crowd on screen erupted in applause as Ethan stepped away from the podium lighter than he had ever looked. Outside her window, the rain stopped for the first time in days. She whispered almost to herself, maybe he finally learned. 2 weeks passed since the press conference, but the echo of Ethan's words still lingered across every major network. Some called him reckless. Others called him brave. For the first time, the Phale Corporation was not the headline his redemption was. In the quiet of her art studio, Mira mixed colors on the wooden palette, sunlight spilling across the floorboards. The art center was thriving. Students filled every corner with laughter and brushes tapping against canvas. Yet even amid the noise, there was a silence inside her, a question she could not erase. Had Ethan really let go of everything, or was this another chapter in his calculated life? That question answered itself one afternoon when she heard his voice behind her. "I hear the place looks better in daylight." She turned sharply. Ethan stood in the doorway, no suit, no entourage. He wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, paint stains already on his hands. He looked almost human. "I thought you left the city," she said carefully. "I did," he replied, "but home has a way of pulling you back." The students nearby whispered, recognizing him from television. Mira gestured toward the back door. "Come on." They will not paint with a billionaire staring at them. Outside, they walked through the small courtyard, the same one she had swept every morning. The air smelled of wet clay and jasmine. He paused by the wall they had painted together weeks ago, the same wall that had survived the rain. "You kept the color," he said quietly. "I tried washing it off," she answered, half smiling, "but it stayed. Like most mistakes worth remembering." Ethan laughed, softly shaking his head. Maybe it was not a mistake. "Then, what was it?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "A beginning." She studied him for a long moment. His voice no longer carried the cold precision of a CEO. It carried something else, weight, warmth, vulnerability. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," he admitted. "For years I built towers so tall I could not see the people at their base. You taught me to look down to see what matters." "Do not romanticize it," she said gently. "I just refuse to play by your rules." "Exactly," he said. "And that is why I fell in love with you." Her breath caught. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of paint cans clinking from inside filled the silence between them. She finally said, "You do not have to say that to prove you changed." "I am not proving anything," he said. "I am just telling the truth finally." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, her ring, the same one she had left behind. It gleamed softly in his palm. "I kept it," he said quietly. "Not because of what it cost, but because it reminded me of who I was when you left. Lost, arrogant, afraid." Mira looked down at the ring, then back at him. "And who are you now?" He smiled faintly. A man still learning how to deserve forgiveness. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "Ethan," he stepped closer, holding out the ring, but not forcing it into her hand. "I do not want another contract. No timelines, no conditions. I just want to build something that lasts with you." She hesitated. The courtyard lights flickered on, warm against the fading sky. For the first time since that rainy night, she saw no distance between them, just two people standing exactly where they were meant to be. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "Then let us build it from the ground up." He slipped the ring back onto her finger, but this time it fit differently, not as a symbol of ownership but of choice. Around them, the sound of laughter drifted through the open doors as the students hung up their paintings. Months later, the Phale Art Foundation opened its first permanent gallery downtown. The press called it "Home is where the art lives." At the center of the gallery hung a single painting, a storm, two silhouettes, and a thin red line connecting them through the rain. During the opening, Ethan turned to her and said softly, "That line, it never faded." She smiled. That is because love, when it is real, does not wash away. The lights dimmed, applause filled the hall, and for the first time in both their lives, they stood not as a billionaire and a homeless artist, not as a contract and an escape, but as two souls who had finally learned what home truly meant. 1 year later, the city skyline shimmered under the spring Sunday. Where once the Phale Corporation towered as a monument of control, it now housed the Phale Art Foundation, a space where young artists could study for free. Reporters called it the boldest transformation of a billionaire legacy in decades. But for Ethan Phale, it was simply the only thing that finally makes sense. Inside the main gallery, Mira was arranging fresh flowers near the front desk. Her hair was a little longer, now streaked with gold from sunlight, and her laughter carried easily through the open hall. The building that once echoed with corporate silence now sang with music, footsteps, and color. Ethan entered quietly, sleeves rolled up, carrying a stack of frames. "You are early again," he said. She smiled. "Someone has to make sure the founder does not hang everything crooked." He set the frames down and laughed. "For the record, I never claimed to be good at symmetry. That is because you used to think everything needed to be perfect," she teased. "And now you just build with heart." They shared a quiet look, one that no longer needed apology. As guests began arriving for the foundation's anniversary gala, Mira's painting took center stage. The contract, the very first artwork she had completed after leaving the penthouse. It showed two figures standing apart, but the single red line between them glowed stronger than ever. Beneath it, a new inscription read, "For love not condition." A journalist approached Ethan near the entrance. "Mr. Phale, do you ever miss your old life?" He smiled slightly. "Every now and then, when I forget what peace feels like. But then I see this place and I remember." "In your wife's role?" the reporter asked. She inspired all this correct. Ethan turned toward Mira across the room, watching her speak with a group of young artists. "She did more than inspire it," he said softly. "She built it. I just follow her lead." Later that evening, as the guests applauded the performance from the foundation students, Mira slipped out to the terrace for a moment of quiet. The night air was warm, the city lights painting golden reflections on the glass towers around them. She leaned on the railing, eyes soft with peace. Ethan followed her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He handed her one. "You disappeared," he said. "I wanted to breathe," she replied. "This night feels unreal." He smiled. "So did our first one." Mira laughed, shaking her head. "That one was a nightmare, Ethan. You showed up in a storm and asked a stranger to marry you." He chuckled. "And you said yes. Maybe we were both crazy." "Maybe," she said, raising her glass. "But some mistakes are meant to happen." They clinked glasses gently. For a moment, they simply stood there listening to the hum of the city. Ethan reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out a smaller ring box, not the one from their contract, but something new. "Mira," he said quietly, "I know we have done this once, but that was a deal. I want this to be a promise." Her eyes widened as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band edged with a faint line of red. "Ethan." He knelt slightly, his voice steady and warm. "Will you marry me again, this time for real? No contracts, no deadlines, just us." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile broke through them. "You already know the answer." He slipped the ring onto her finger under the same city lights that had once witnessed their lies. This time, it was truth shining between them. When they walked back inside, applause erupted once again, this time spontaneous, unplanned. The music swelled, the lights reflected off the gallery walls, and the red line in Mira's painting seemed to glow brighter than ever. As the night came to an end, Ethan took her hand and whispered, "You once said people live in the cracks. Maybe love grows there too." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let us keep building." Outside, the city that had once judged them now celebrated them. The rain that had followed their story was gone, replaced by soft wind and starlight. Inside the gallery, the final scene lingered on the painting, their silhouettes forever connected by that red line, the symbol of a love no longer bound by condition but by choice. The morning after the anniversary gala, sunlight poured through the tall windows of their apartment above the foundation. The city was waking up, but inside everything felt still. Mira sat on the edge of the bed, sketching in her notebook, while Ethan brewed coffee. The sound of the machine filled the quiet like a heartbeat. "You are drawing again," he said, setting a cup beside her. She smiled. "I never stopped. I just draw slower now. Life finally stopped chasing me." He sat beside her, glancing at the page. It was a sketch of the foundation's entrance children running through the doors, paintbrushes in hand. He looked at it for a long moment, then said softly, "That is what I always wanted this city to look like. Alive." Later that day, they walked hand in hand through the main gallery. The staff was preparing for a new exhibit, Dreams of the City. The walls were covered with paintings from artists who once had nowhere to go. Ethan stopped in front of one, a portrait of him and Mira painted by one of their students. The caption beneath read, "The Builders of Home." He smiled. "I never thought I would end up on a wall." Mira teased, "Do not get used to it. The next one would be about the janitor who keep the lights on." He laughed, the sound deep and warm echoing through the open space. For the first time, he laughed without tension, without calculation. In the afternoon, the two of them met with the city council to discuss expanding the foundation to new districts. As the meeting ended, a councilwoman said, "Mr. Phale, few people give up everything for something they believe in. You must be proud." Ethan looked at Mira, her paint-stained hands folded on the table. "I am," he said, "but not of what I built. I am proud of who taught me why it mattered." That night, back at home, they sat by the large window overlooking the city. Below, streetlights flickered like scattered stars. Mira leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" "The old life, the suits, the meetings, the headlines." He thought for a moment. "Sometimes I miss the noise," he admitted, "but not the silence that came with it." She smiled. "Good, because the only silence I want now is the kind that feels peaceful." He reached for her hand. "You know, when we first met, I thought you were chaos." "I was," she said softly, "but sometimes chaos is what clears the dust." Outside thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, but this time it did not bring fear. It was a kind of storm that promised new beginning. Ethan stood, walked to the table, and picked up the framed copy of her painting, The Contract. The red line still burned bright between the figures. He turned to her. "I used to think that line meant we were bound by something fragile. Now I know it means we are connected by choice." Mira smiled, her voice low. "Every day we wake up and choose again. That is what love really is." He placed the painting back on the wall and drew her into his arms. The rain began to fall soft against the glass, a rhythm they both knew well. But this time it was not the beginning of chaos, it was the sound of a life rebuilt. Outside the window, the city glowed brighter under the storm. And inside, two people who had once signed a contract for convenience now lived by a promise written only in the quiet language of love. Weeks later, the Phale Art Foundation prepared for its biggest milestone yet, a traveling exhibition that would take Mira students across the country. The theme was simple: home is what we built together. Reporters and sponsors were already calling it a revolution in community art. Ethan stood in the courtyard helping workers load crates of paintings into a van. He wore paint-splattered jeans, the sleeves of his shirt rolled high. No one called him Mr. Phale anymore. To everyone here, he was simply Ethan, the man who showed up early, stayed late, and made sure every artist got a meal before the day ended. Inside, Mira walked from easel to easel, checking the last pieces before departure. She stopped at one, a new painting she had finished the night before. It showed a house made entirely of color, standing strong in the middle of a storm. The brushstrokes were rough, raw, alive. Ethan stepped behind her quietly. "That one is yours, isn't it?" She nodded. "It is called Shelter. It is about us." He smiled. "Then it deserves the best spot." As the truck doors closed and the crew began to leave, a sudden spring breeze swept through the courtyard, scattering sheets of paper and petals from the garden. Mira laughed, chasing after them, her hair flying. Ethan watched her every movement, every laugh, and realized this was what peace looked like. Not perfection, but presence. That evening, when the last guest had gone, they sat on the gallery steps with takeout boxes and 2 paper cups of coffee. The city lights shimmered around them like a sea of tiny suns. Mira looked at him and said softly, "Do you ever think about how strange it is? We met because of a lie, and now everything we have is built on truth." Ethan nodded. Maybe that is what redemption really means. Turning a mistake into a foundation. She rested her head on his shoulder. I used to believe love was something fragile, something you could lose if you were not careful. And now, he asked, now I know it is something you build every day, like a home you keep repairing, never perfect, always alive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I was supposed to give this to you months ago, he said. She unfolded it and gasped softly. It was a deed transferring the entire gallery building to her name. Ethan, he smiled, you gave me a life worth living. The least I can do is give you a place to keep it growing. She looked at him, eyes glistening, and whispered, you really did learn. He brushed a streak of paint from her cheek and said, I had the best teacher. The city wind rose again, carrying the smell of rain, of earth, of new beginnings. Under the glow of the foundation sign, they sat together in silence, no longer a contract, no longer a scandal, but a love that had weathered every storm and built something unbreakable. Spring turned to early summer, and the Phale Art Foundation pulsed with new life. The traveling exhibition had returned, bringing stories from every corner of the country, children who painted their towns, veterans who rediscovered color, and families who found hope in brushes and blank walls. For Mira and Ethan, it was proof that what they had built had become larger than either of them. On the quiet morning, sunlight streamed through the gallery windows. Mira walked among the new displays, fingertips tracing the edges of each frame. She stopped at a familiar canvas, the contract now hanging beside her latest work, Shelter. The two paintings mirrored each other, one born from a lie, the other from truth. She smiled softly. We really came full circle, she murmured. Ethan entered behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You always talk to the art when no one is around, he said gently. She took the cup from his hand. Because it listens better than people do. He laughed quietly. Maybe that is why I married an artist. You married me by accident, she teased. Fate just refused to end the story there. They walked to the center of the hall where a new plaque had been installed. It read, Founded by Ethan and Mira Phale, a home built from kindness. She stared at it for a long moment, her eyes glistening. It feels strange seeing our names together like that, she whispered. Ethan's voice softened. It feels right to me. Outside the city moved with its usual rhythm buses, horns, the rush of ordinary life. But inside, time felt slower. He turned to her, reaching for her hand. Do you know what today is? She shook her head. The anniversary of the day we signed that contract. Mira smiled, realizing, then this time let us sign something real. He nodded. Together they bent over a blank canvas, each writing one word in bright red paint. Home. No lawyers, no papers, no signatures, just color and faith. As the paint dried, they stood back to look at it. Ethan slipped an arm around her shoulders and whispered, no more contracts. Only promises. Mira leaned into him, her voice barely above a breath. And this time, I believe you. Outside church bells rang across the city, carrying their sound through open windows and painted walls, a quiet reminder that love once learned becomes its own masterpiece. The evening light poured through the tall windows of the gallery, turning the white walls into gold. A gentle breeze drifted in from the open doors, carrying the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and music. The Phale Art Foundation was hosting its 2nd annual charity gala, but this time there were no headlines, no cameras chasing a scandal. Only people gathered to celebrate what love and persistence had built. Mira stood near the main exhibit, watching the crowd admire the new collection. The painting home hung proudly at the center, its red wood glowing under the soft light. Around it were works from children, veterans, and dreamers, each piece telling a story of hope born from struggle. She smiled, remembering the woman she used to be, the one who painted under an alley's leaking roof, never imagining this life could be hers. Ethan approached quietly, wearing a simple suit, no tie, just his familiar easy smile. They love it, he said. She turned to him, her voice calm but full. They loved the story behind it, and that story was ours. He took her hand gently. It still is. I used to think legacy meant buildings and profit margins. Now I know it is what you leave in people's hearts. The music shifted to a slower melody. Guests began to dance beneath the hanging lights. Ethan extended his hand. Dance with me. Mira laughed softly. You know, I am terrible at this. That makes 2 of us, he said, leading her to the floor anyway. They moved slowly, clumsily, but it did not matter. The world outside had once measured them by contracts and wealth. Now it was measured by kindness, by art, by love. Ethan leaned close and whispered, Do you remember the night I asked you to marry me the first time? How could I forget, she said, smiling. You were nervous and rude all at once." He laughed, shaking his head. "And you were the only person brave enough to say yes." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lights. "No, Ethan. I was the only person who saw the man behind the name." As the song faded, applause rose from the other side of the room. One of their students, a teenage boy, stood beside the microphone and said, "This foundation exists because two people believed art could heal. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Phale, for teaching us that love can build anything." The crowd cheered. Mira squeezed Ethan's hand, tears welling in her eyes. He looked at her and said softly, "You gave me my second chance." She smiled through the tears. "And you gave me my first home." Outside the city, lights shimmered against the night sky, reflecting through the glass walls like thousands of stars. The foundation sign glowed faintly above them, "Home is where the art lives." As the final scene settled, the camera would have pulled back to show the two of them surrounded by laughter, art, and life. But there was no camera, only the real story of a billionaire who learned love cannot be bought and a woman who turned brokenness into beauty. And in the golden light of that evening, their story came full circle, no longer about status, but about truth. No longer about contracts, but about choice. A love rebuilt from rain, now standing steady in the Sunday.